I'm going to talk about the title of my speech that I gave several months ago is The Challenges of a Superpower. And of course, America is now the world's unchallenged superpower in many ways. And I would say that this is a time of assessing what America is and what the future of our country should be. The American heritage, I would say, that is a time of challenge. We have habitually or historically risen to greatness. And we realize that in a democracy like ours, that change from challenge to greatness is a matter of responsibility for individual citizens. And that's what I am, just a private citizen like you. What are the goals of a great nation? I would say they're the same as the goals of a great person. They're the goals that have been established most clearly in the religions that we might adopt as our own. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, and so forth. And they are all the same. There's really no incompatibility between a desire on the part of a human being to be a superb human being in the eyes of whatever God we worship than it is for a nation to say, I want to be a superb nation. I want to be a genuine superpower in all the meaning of the word. So what are those characteristics? I would say it would be a commitment to peace, a commitment to justice, a commitment to freedom or democracy, a commitment to human rights, to protecting the environment that we've inherited, to sharing our wealth with others. I think those are the hallmarks of a superpower. Let's look at America for a moment. Let's talk about peace, first of all. Since World War II, we've been almost constantly at war. In Korea, and then Vietnam, Cambodia, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Grenada, Libya, Panama, Somalia, Haiti, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Iraq, Afghanistan. I don't know about the future. Iran, Syria, Mali. You get the point. Our country is now looked upon as the foremost warlike nation on earth. And there is almost a complete dearth now of a commitment of America to negotiate differences with others. It's not just Democrats or Republicans or a particular president. It's a consciousness or attitude of Americans like you and me. I'm not a pacifist. As George pointed out, my career was as a naval officer. When I was 6 years old, that's all I wanted to do was to be a naval officer, and I went to Annapolis. And I served on 2 battleships and 3 submarines. I was willing to give my life, if necessary, to protect the interests of my country. So I'm not against protecting ourselves. I believe in a strong defense and worked for that when I was president. As a matter of fact, since the Civil War era, the only president that's had more military service than I was Eisenhower. Well, we need to be working for peace for others as well as ourselves. When my wife and I were on the way to the inauguration last month, we tried to think of anywhere on earth right now that the United States has a major commitment to bring peace to other people. I can't think of a place. The Mideast is a typical need, has a typical need for peace. This is the first time in more than 50 years when the United States has not been trying to bring peace to Israel and its neighbors. Well, let's look at human rights. America was a nation that was the foremost committed to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was passed with Eleanor Roosevelt's leadership when the United Nations was first formed. And for many times during the interim period, we've been the champion of human rights. That's no longer the case. Look up the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on your computer. You'll find there are 30 paragraphs. And our staff at the Carter Center has determined that we are now violating 10 of those 30 paragraphs. We've now disavowed the application of the Geneva controls on treatment of prisoners at war. And you know there's been a lot of altercation back and forth lately about the use of drones to assassinate Americans, even in foreign countries, or not excluding within the United States. We have 166 people at Guantanamo now. Half of them have never been tried at all. They never have been accused of a crime. And all of them at Guantanamo now are faced with the prospect of serving the rest of their lives in prison. Our president has announced that we have the right to send people to prison for life without a trial, without legal counsel, and without any specific charge against them. This is a policy toward human rights that is usually accepted, particularly since 9/11, when the restraints on human rights and commitments to human rights were very firm and unequivocal in the United States. There's some other things that need to be at least discussed. We're the only industrialized nation on earth that still has a death penalty. In fact, 90% of all the executions in the world are in 4 countries: Saudi Arabia, China, Iran, and the United States. We have the highest prison population by far in the world. When I left office in 1980, we had a very low prison population. For every 1 person in prison then, we now have 7.5 in prison. 7 times as many people as we had in prison. And almost all of the people in prison, a large proportion of them, are poor or minorities or mentally retarded. In fact, the largest mental institution in the United States is the prison in Los Angeles. Let's look at justice or equity. I was asked to make a speech, 2 speeches as a matter of fact, when 2000 rolled around. And the subject that I was assigned was, what's the greatest challenge that the world faces in the new millennium? And my decision was, it was the growing chasm, increasing chasm between rich people and poor people. Well, we have that in our country as well. Since I left office in 1980, again, the income for the top 1% of Americans has doubled, and the income for the top 1,000th of a percent, 100th of a percent rather, has quintupled because of our political system permitting the more powerful people, the richer people, to prevail in changing income tax laws and so forth. High school rates in America for the first time last year stopped climbing since 1890. And the portion of family income for tuition in either public or private institutions has increased from 4% of average income to 10% of a family's income. Americans in poverty has increased 31% just in the last 5 years. Democracy, you know the state of our democratic process now. When I ran for office, first of all, as a peanut farmer, as a governor, against the incumbent Gerald Ford, for the general election, you know how much money we raised? 0. When I ran 4 years later against your governor, Ronald Reagan, we raised 0. We just used a $2 per person checkoff. And now there's a massive infusion of money into the primary and general election system. Unrestricted by the stupid decision of a U.S. Supreme Court. And most of that money, as you well know, is spent on negative commercials to destroy the reputation of your opponent. And that has fragmented or divided Americans into red and blue states, and also has divided candidates against one another, so that when they finally get to Washington, there's no compatibility detectable now between Democratic and Republican senators or members of Congress, or between a House that's Republican and a Democratic president. And the blame is both ways. It's not just one way. We haven't had a federal budget now in 5 years. And about 40% of everything we spend out of the federal government now has to be borrowed. And there's no concerted effort to address the roughly $1 trillion deficit each year. The environment. Up until, I'd say, George Bush Sr., America was in the forefront of nations on earth promoting a good environment and dealing with global warming. We're now one of the laggard countries. The Europeans and many others are moving ahead of us. Well, I'm not criticizing my country, which I think is the best nation on earth, and I'm very proud to have served as its leader. But I'm pointing out to you that in this time of assessment, I'd say particularly for my 23 children and grandchildren, which George enumerated, and for the students that I've taught now for 31 years, and for other young people at least, we need to look at what are the possibilities for improving. Rosa and I, since I left the White House and voluntarily retired by the 1980 election, have formed the Carter Center. We now have programs in 73 countries on earth. 35 of them, not accidentally, are in Africa. And we try to deal with these same principles that I've just outlined to you in kind of a negative way. We try to go to countries and promote peace where the United States is somewhat or totally alienated from them. The Carter Center, we go to Cuba regularly. We go to North Korea regularly. We have full-time offices in Jerusalem and Ramallah and also in Gaza City. And we deal with both sides within the Palestinian community, as well as with Israel, and with Jordan, and with Egypt, and with Lebanon, and even with Syria now. We deal with both sides in the terrible civil war going on in Syria. We see the adverse impact of 60 years of economic embargo as we strive to destroy the economy of the people of Cuba, who are already suffering under dictatorships, as you know. The same thing in North Korea. I go to North Korea every now and then. And I go into the countryside of North Korea and I see the starving children, where the World Health Organization and the United Nations Food Fund measures the upper arms of 10-year-old children that are just about as big around as a golf ball. And we have a punitive embargo against them, also having lasted now for 60 years. We try to change that. We try to promote freedom and democracy when countries are facing a challenge in their governments. The Carter Center does. We just finished our 93rd troubled election in Sierra Leone. And in that Mano River Basin area of Western Africa, which includes also Cote d'Ivoire and Guinea and Liberia, it's just a typical place. As the Arab Spring or Arab Awakening took place, the Carter Center has been there. We've been in Egypt for 2 years as Egypt struggles to form a new government. And I'll be going back very shortly again. We did the election in Tunisia. We did the election in Libya. We did the first election in the biggest Muslim country on earth, Indonesia, following 50 years of dictatorship. So we try to bring freedom and democracy there to those countries as they struggle for freedom and democracy. We also work on health care, the sharing of what we have with poor people. one of the basic principles of the Carter Center is to fill vacuums in the world. And over a period of time, our budget, which started out just trying to promote peace between countries or peace between the United States and other countries, shifted toward democracy, which we originated, the monitoring of election, and then primarily to treating 5 what the World Health Organization calls neglected tropical diseases. One of these is a disease called onchocerciasis or river blindness. I just came back from Mexico this week. I was down there because we have almost completely eliminated river blindness from Latin American countries. We just have one little tribe of 24,000 members totally that has any more onchocerciasis or river blindness, and that will be eliminated within the next 2 years. We won't have any river blindness left in Latin America. We get free medicine from major pharmaceutical companies like Merck Company. They give us free medicine to treat river blindness. Last year we treated 12.8 million people with free medicine from Merck Company. We distributed a total of 160 million doses of Mectizan, they call it. We also have dealt with trachoma, which is the number one cause of blindness, except for cataracts. We've administered 75 million cases of free Zithromax, which is an antibiotic. And the Carter Center last year performed 40% of the total surgeries on Earth for trachoma. Trachoma is a disease caused by filthy eyes, where flies get around children's eyes and adults' eyes and cause infection. And the upper eyelid turns inward, so every time you blink your eye, the eyelashes slash the cornea, and that causes blindness. We also have built in Africa, encourage the people to build 2.3 latrines, outdoor toilets. I'm not known in Africa as the one who brought peace between Israel and Egypt. I'm known as the person who builds the most latrines on earth. Guinea worm is another case. Guinea worm is caused by drinking filthy water from a rain pond where it doesn't rain but just 2 or 3 months a year. And the people get a worm inside their body, which 12 months later is about 30 to 36 inches long. And it stings the inside of the epidermis and causes a terrible infection that destroys muscle tissue. We found nobody else wanted to deal with this disease because it affects isolated villages in the desert areas and also in the jungle areas. And we decided to take it on. We found 3.5 million cases in 20 countries, 3 in Asia and the rest of them in sub-Saharan Africa. 26,500 villages had guinea worm. We've been to every village. And we've taught the people what to do so they won't have the disease. We've reduced now 3.5 million cases. Last year, we had 542 cases on Earth. And within a couple of years, we'll have our last case of guinea worm, which will be in South Sudan, which is a new nation that we helped form by monitoring their elections and letting them have a referendum. So this is the kind of thing that just a small NGO will do. I didn't come here to brag about what we're doing, but I came to point out that these apparently intransigent problems that our country faces and that every one of you individually faces and I face are not insoluble. If we set our goals high and are determined to work in harmony with each other, no matter what our social status or what our political alienation or affiliation might be, to work in harmony in this great country. This is what we need to assess. In closing my remarks so I can answer your questions, let me just say that I believe that all of us would agree that our country, the United States of America, should be a champion of peace. We should be a champion of justice. We should be a champion of human rights. We should be a champion of environment. We should be a champion of alleviating suffering among other people on earth. This is what I think are the challenges of a superpower. Thank you.